share. All right, thank you guys for joining us today. We've got a little smaller group today. Will be a little more time for question and answers than I think. Today on our Lunch and Learn, we've been getting a number of questions over the last week since we did our virtual 501 conference last week about advice on running and managing digital and virtual events. So that's going to be our topic today. I am going to be one of the speakers along with my colleague Alicia here. Together we both spearheaded a lot of the organization around our 501 conference. We had some more support as well. It was not just the two of us, but we'll be talking to both the kind of logistics concerns and then content and a lot of the things outside of logistics and just how you take events that were running in person before and converting them to work for virtual settings, which is a lot easier said than done, I think. We've been talking to a lot of people about how to make these kind of events work, lots of different types of events with different goals, and then it's different for every organization and every kind of audience that you'd be speaking to. So before we dive into our running virtual events topic today, just wanted to make sure again that everybody on the call is aware of all of the resources that CNM has for nonprofits right now, and that includes our free 15-minute office hours appointment with our consultants that you can schedule anytime on our COVID page, as well as all of our virtual certificate and training programs. We're running a series of different programs through the end of June, and then mid-July we're going to be starting a summer seminar series that we'll be launching at the beginning of next week, and those are going to be a whole new host of diverse trainers, a whole bunch of new topics that are very timely and responsive, and all at significantly cheaper price points than we've been doing most of our normal seminars. Few of our regular programs coming up though, in the next week or two, we've got a virtual financial literacy and budgets for the non-accountant. That's one of our programs that we run pretty regularly. That's going to be next Wednesday, I believe. Then exploring succession planning on Thursday, June 18th. And then the week after that on Tuesday, our nonprofit management bootcamp. So these are all courses that we run pretty regularly, are usually pretty sold out. So if you can get a seat, I'd recommend hopping on. And yeah, that's it for now. So wanted to talk today about running virtual events, what to consider, what your options are, what your goals are, all of that. And please feel free, let me make sure the chat is up here. Please feel free to chime in with a question, raise your hand, put something in the chat. As we've got a little smaller group today, we can definitely stop and take questions as we go. So first question that you need to consider is deciding to go virtual. We're going to be talking kind of generically about what to consider, and then also from our at CNN's experience of both switching our conference and switching all of our educational programs and seminars over. So the first question is obviously, do you need to go virtual, and how do you access your audience and stuff? We realized pretty early on, with our normal conference is 150 to 250 people that it was not going to be happening. I remember there was a little while at the beginning where we were thinking like, ooh, maybe by June, things might be a little better, but there was just too much uncertainty, and it's impossible to plan an in-person event with that much uncertainty. So we decided pretty early on that we were going to switch both our, seminar programs, our certificates, and our, big physical conference, in large part because our building wouldn't let us in. If we controlled our building, it might have been a slightly different story for some of these smaller programs, but it was pretty much taken out of our control because we just, learned pretty early on that we wouldn't be allowed to let, more than 10 people in the door pretty much. So that kicked off a pretty big research phase for us. We've been using Zoom for a lot of, our internal meetings, and that was, a switch in and of itself. But we knew that there are a lot of different platforms out there. And so it started with a big research sprint of what kind of platforms are there, how do they host different types of events, and what are the goals for the events. We've had other lunch and learns where we've talked about how to host virtual fundraisers, some other kind of specific types of virtual events. But it's worth noting that depending on the type of event that you're doing, there are going to be different tech platforms that are going to be appropriate, and there's going to be different organizing strategies that would make sense. So I think, curious Elisa if you had any other ones to add, but I think kind of the main buckets are fundraising events where the whole goal is to, raise money you would otherwise be doing, a gala or some sort of auction or something that would have been in person. Educational programs for us, that's, our regular monthly and weekly seminars and certificate programs. And then kind of larger events where the whole point really is to bring a community together, like our big conference, where it's, more than just a single meeting, but the goal is really, make connections, a lot of content, all that kind of stuff. So with that in mind, we were looking at a lot of different tech platforms. Our initial, thought was, what if we can just use Zoom? What if we can just use GoToMeeting or something pretty similar? And for the large kind of scale community gathering, our main concern was like, we're going to have a lot of different sessions, and we want to be able to have options, things that run simultaneously. And the main concern was like, how do we do that without it just becoming, 20 emails from Zoom that need to get to every participant, and everybody gets really confused and everybody gets lost. And so we were very ambivalent initially about using something like Zoom because of the attendee experience and wanting to make sure that it was really streamlined, really clear, and really, user-friendly. The last thing we want to do is create all sorts of other obstacles for people to join events. If events are going digital, they should be easier. They should be easier to access. They should be cheaper. You don't need to drive to them. Location isn't a concern. So our main goal was reducing barriers. If you're looking at something for fundraising, though, we've been seeing that a lot of the best practices now have been using live streaming events. Our goal was, how do we put up a paywall? How do we make sure only registered guests can get in? And that's a very different goal than how do we get as many people as possible to join? And, you don't want to put up any obstacles if your goal is to raise money from people. So we've been seeing a lot of people doing successful fundraising events, doing live streams on, very accessible platforms where their audience is, whether it's Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitch, or sometimes all of the above. We've seen platforms that, I believe that if you're doing a Zoom webinar, you have the ability to simultaneously live stream on YouTube and Facebook and other things like that. And in the past month or so, Facebook and Instagram in particular opened up their whole donate button and donate platform to a lot more organizations. So if you're looking to do fundraising, we've seen that, doing things on live stream, not just, you sitting in front of a camera and asking for money, but figuring out, creative ways of converting what was your in-person physical event to an online streaming event. And I think my favorite example of that so far has been an organization that would normally do like an annual kind of like wine tasting event that, that's a challenge. How do you do a wine tasting event digitally? And their creative solution was to get a couple of, local celebrity chefs to come on, cook some food, talk about wine pairings, talk about the connection to the cause. And so it was a way of taking what they were doing and turning it into more of like, a TV show that you would watch rather than an event that you would participate in. Back to our concerns a little bit, we were trying to figure out how to make this whole like multi-session experience really work so that like a physical conference, you could show up and you could, go to session A, you could choose between sessions B, C, and D, you then come back together with everyone for a keynote. For a while, we looked into some of these multi-session platforms, and there are a lot of them out there. Run the World, vConference, E2M Live are just a handful of the ones that we looked into. They're all designed to do pretty much that of connecting multi-sessions. So the goal is to create that seamless user experience. And a lot of them are about literally replicating in-person events. And they have like vendor booths and they have lobbies where people can hang out. Our main obstacle for those is that a lot of them were really expensive. And they seem to be mostly designed or geared towards like big industry events that would have a lot of money behind them and are not necessarily, designed for or budgeted for even large nonprofit events. We're not about to spend, 10 to 50K on a tech platform for a couple of day conference with a few hundred attendees. That may be different if we were like an auto manufacturer and we're replacing like the LA Auto Show or something like that. There are definitely some simpler ones. Run the World in particular was pretty interesting and minimal and not crazy expensive. But they ended up not being the right approach for us. In the end, the solution that we went with was a combination of Zoom accounts. So we had 3 different Zoom accounts. that had various upgrades on them. You're pretty limited by size depending on your account. So we had 2 different meeting accounts that were up to 500 attendees, and then we had a webinar account that was also up to 500 attendees. And so by juggling those, we were able to do, a keynote in the morning that started on the webinar, 2 different breakout sessions in the different Zoom meeting accounts, and then everyone would come back to the main webinar account. And the way we shared all this information ended up going through Eventbrite. We do all of our ticketing through Eventbrite anyways, and pretty early on in the process, we found that Eventbrite had recently launched a new online event feature, basically. The main problem that we were trying to get around is like, how do we make the instructions and the program and the access really clear in a single page that only registered guests can see without us having to develop a whole backend to do that, going back and forth on verifying all of this information and double checking to make sure that the right people have the right access. And that ended up being what Eventbrite was able to do for us. They have this online event page where after somebody buys a ticket, you get a link to this page. And then on that page, it's pretty, it's a WYSIWYG editor. What you see is what you get. So you don't need to code. We were just able to add in all of the Zoom information that we had in our program. So, session name, session time, Zoom link, Zoom password, all on one page so that everybody could see it. And that ended up being pretty smooth. There were a handful of little bumps of, some people had trouble accessing their Eventbrite. They had, registered with one email, but it was through work and they didn't have access to that one. But I think it ended up only being, under 10% of our users had issues accessing, and everyone was able to get on board. Aside from that, trying to think, Alicia, if there's anything else that I was supposed to go over when we talked about it. Price point was also a question. We had heard and talked to a lot of people when we were planning, how do you adjust your price point for virtual events? In general, the rule is cheaper. It's a different experience than in person. I think we had normally charged $295 for our in-person conference. That was one full day. And we ended up switching to $95 for the 3 days. And the goal was to, obviously make it accessible. Budgets are tight right now. We weren't trying to make, too high of a hurdle for people to join. Our goal is to bring as much of the nonprofit community together in Southern California to share information. But we also had costs to cover, of course. Our sponsorship was a bit down. We had sponsors that had committed to a physical event and then a lot of work to go and make sure that everyone was still okay with a virtual event and figure out, what those sponsors would get that would be equivalent to what they would get in an in-person event, knowing that it's not really possible to get a full equivalency going. But so we ended up lowering the price considerably, with the plan being that over 3 days, it would be a lot easier for people to kind of hop on when they had time. It wasn't the same as everyone just blocking off a full day, but trying to balance the need for, synchronous and asynchronous content. We wanted to get as many people together at the same time as we could, but knowing that people's schedules were really busy, suffering, working through multiple crises at a time, maybe they wouldn't be able to join all of it. So another perk of going virtual is that it's a lot easier to record. You just have to click the record button. You don't need to hire a film crew. You don't need to do all the editing and all of that. So the job of getting everything to be accessible to attendees after the conference was a lot easier than other years. So we wanted to make the price point something that was, doable, felt like a decent deal, and also got you access to things beyond the conference. And so we gave video access for free to everyone who attended the conference, and are experimenting with charging, non-attendees to stream the videos and download the resources after the fact. And that's been going decently so far. Seeing some questions popping up here. So I think we should answer and get to a couple of those, and then we'll switch gears and Alicia can talk more about the content considerations and all of the very crazy last minute work that she had to do of completely rearranging our conference multiple times in the weeks leading up to it. So yes, we're considering a virtual awards ceremony, which may be more challenging. I would love to hear more about that, Gaynor. That sounds really interesting, and sounds kind of similar to been seeing, schools trying to figure out how to do graduation events, and kind of pairing, virtual things with, in-person car parades and stuff like that. I'd be curious to learn more about a virtual award ceremony, but that seems like something that could be paired with some in-person content in a cool way of, maybe people that are being given awards can be delivered, physical, actual awards that they can then like be holding on camera when they're accepting them virtually. But that seems like a really interesting and particularly challenging event to do. Candace, you said question for the end. So we'll get to that. And yeah, Lisa, this was less a question and more option for interpretations. Yeah, that was one of the things that I had a lot of things for our conference that, we wanted to get to, and there's never quite enough time to do all of that. But one of the things I was really interested in was, how to get accessibility options, how to get captions, how to get, someone doing sign language, and that, we just didn't have time to really pull that together. Shanti, it sounds like you just did a virtual awards thing. I would love to hear what that experience was like, just both the work and kind of what went really well, if you don't mind sharing.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. Yeah, I work for East West Players, and we're a small performance theater in LA. And our gala got canceled, obviously, due to everything that was going on. And so we had to get creative of how we can incorporate the arts and also bring in the revenue that we typically get from the event. It actually went really well. We used YouTube and Facebook for our streaming services. And we were able to get a lot of the actors and performers and people to volunteer their time to pre-record speeches and songs. And we had a couple of people come on for the live part of it. And then we also had a portion that was preset. What we did is we made the event free for everybody, but we had a section that you could still purchase tables or sponsorship for those who wanted to be able to donate in some way. And so the table packages included a special event that was prior to our event where we carved out an hour of time of celebrity spokespeople to come in and kind of talk to the people who had purchased tables. And we also had a table package that included dinner. So we had dinner sent to people's homes so that they could have somewhat of an experience of getting dinner, because we didn't have the sit down aspect of it. And then we also had a silent auction that was released early to those who had purchased advance tickets so that they could get in and be able to bid on those items. And we actually used a company for the silent auction portion. So we did save a lot, obviously, in expenses because it was a lot of internal work, but a lot of it was volunteer. And so we really only paid for the programs.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a good experience.
Yeah, that's the other just benefit of virtual events is, there's so many in-person costs of, catering and space and rentals and all of that. Not to say it's all super easy, because when you were describing that, I was starting to just get stressed out of like, oh man, you had to do all these pre-recorded videos and sending meals and like different links to different people. And yeah, that's a lot. I'm curious that you said you did a company that did the silent auction. Did you do everything else internally, or did you kind of contract out different pieces?
90% of it was done internally. We did have a few independent contractors that we brought in to help as far as the musical numbers with the arrangements and people to kind of direct that. So we did have a small percentage that did that, but mostly it was internal. So we had a busy month in prepping for it, but it worked out in the end.
That's great to hear. And did you do a good job of meeting your goals? Was it similar to in-person event? Was it successful in your eyes?
It was extremely successful, actually. The margin of profit that we received was actually greater than what we would have received had we had an in-person event, because the expenses were a lot less.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really great to hear. I know that a lot of, performance and sort of public, just, events like that have been really difficult to transition, and organizations have been struggling. So that's that's really cool to hear that you were able to pull off a,
Yeah.
you know, even more
And
successful fundraising event.
exactly. And we're a staff of 6. So
Wow.
so it was a lot of work, but we made it. It was all hands on deck and we made it work.
That's amazing. Last question, just because I'm curious, and then we'll pivot over to Alicia. How did you do the dinner portion? Was that like actual food delivery? Did you do gift cards? Like, was it just through a caterer?
Yep, we had delivery. We had food delivered from some upscale restaurants around the area and had them
Very cool.
delivered on the day and time.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool. Congrats.
Thanks.
I think we'll probably want to circle back and ask more questions, and I'm sure other people will have more, but would love to hand it over to Alicia, who can talk a little bit about just our experience in sort of wrangling all these people and all the content and how it differed from the normal in-person version.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks everybody for being here. I know it's Friday. It's getting towards the end of the day, and it could be a little difficult to still be kind of focused. So thanks for everybody. Thanks everybody for being here. And Shanti, that was great. Thank you for sharing that information. So I know a lot of folks are trying to figure out like creative ways to be able to continue with their activities and their events. So that's really great to hear that something like that was so successful and with such a small team. Amazing. So full transparency, I'll start off with just saying that I started with CNM at the end of March. So I've been pretty much sheltering in place since starting. So I haven't really met folks in person and came into the organization when there had already been a little bit of pre-planning for the conference. You know, planning had started, I believe, towards the end of the year with some information, some meetings that had taken place, and then there was also an RFP that had been sent out for potential breakout session speakers. So there was a little bit of the pre-work that was done. But as we all know, with the pandemic, things needed to shift, and you know, content needed to be reviewed and taken a look at just to make sure that it was being responsive. I think we struggled a little bit in the beginning with trying to think about, you know, wanting to be responsive, but also not wanting to forget that there's things that need to be addressed and take place outside of the pandemic. The pandemic obviously was heightening certain things, so we definitely wanted to make sure to be responsive to that. But we also wanted to make sure that we weren't going completely to the other extreme and forgetting other things that maybe folks wanted to still hear about. So I think one of the things that I first did was really to look at the previous year feedback from the conference. Really take a look and see what the survey said. What did people say? What were some of the highlights? What were some of the challenges or things that could be improved? So that was my first step, was really to look at the previous year's feedback and make sure that, you know, even again, putting the frame of the pandemic, even though that's the case, still taking that feedback and really thinking about how that would play out in terms of the content for this year. I think the other thing that we wanted to, that I did was just to make sure that engaging other staff members. So from my perspective of being new, I wanted to make sure that I engaged other staff that had participated in the conference, get their feedback. And I think one of the things, like I've always been taught that when you work on something, like always think of it from the perspective of if somebody new comes into the organization and has to pick it up, that they could be able to pick it up and run with it. So when I plan and when I start doing work and when I start typing things up, I always try to think of it from that perspective of if somebody comes in and has to read this and pick it up, are they going to understand it? So really wanting to make sure to get that feedback and then put something together that another person, say next year, can take a look at, and if they're working on it, can then run with it as well. So we did that, took a look at that, made sure to get feedback from staff. And then, you know, Erin talked a little bit about the pricing. Beyond conferences, we also do seminars. So a lot of the seminars obviously were in person. So now transitioning to virtual, we really needed to take a look at, okay, with the in-person seminars, like what are some of the things that happen? It's like almost like a process review, because I think once you start doing seminars, you just get in the habit of it, that you don't really think about the little things that have to take place to get it to where it is. So I think, you know, we really had to take a look at, okay, what are some of the things that people like about the seminar? You know, the networking opportunity, being in person. So how do you try to then capture that in a virtual kind of situation? How do you try to still have that kind of aspect? And we've talked about ways, like we had talked about a possible Slack channel, you know, post-conference, or, you know, just trying to find ways for folks to stay connected after coming to the seminar or to the conference. So we really kind of took a look at that to see like what are some of the things that happen in person that we can either try to transition into virtual, or if not, try to think about other ways to think about it. So that was it. And I think the other thing too, in terms of like some of the pre-planning with the conference, you know, we had a lot of, we outsourced, right? So there was a lot of folks that did sessions that were not CNM staff members. So I think one of the things is really like, what does your outreach look like? So when you start thinking about reaching out to folks to really get the RFP out, whether it's an RFP, whether it's an email blast that you send out just saying, hey, there's a conference happening, we would like your submissions, you know, who are you reaching out to? And what does that look like? I think one of the things that happens a lot is, you know, you kind of get in a situation where you have your kind of the usual suspects, right? Your go-to folks, the folks that maybe are always the ones that are responding to your requests. How do you make sure though that you're reaching out to other folks that maybe aren't aware of the conference or aren't aware of what's being offered, to make sure that you have a broader voice, a broader perspective as well? So I think that's something that we definitely looked at in terms of, you know, who are we reaching out to? How are we reaching out to people? We're using social media. I think Erin mentioned we were using LinkedIn. We're getting a lot of traffic on the LinkedIn page. I think there was also Twitter was being used as well. Instagram, I think, was being used as well, just to kind of get the word out and make sure that folks were aware. I think the other thing too we looked at is really working internally with staff. Staff come across and work with different staff members from multiple organizations. How do we make sure that staff are equipped to then be able to outreach as well to their networks and make sure that the information beyond the conference, but also information about sessions and wanting speakers, making sure that that information is going out as well, so we can broaden the reach a little bit. So that's some of the pre-planning that took place. In terms of content considerations, you know, we had a lot of RFPs that had been submitted prior to the pandemic. So it was really taking a look at those the proposals that had been submitted and really thinking about, okay, this has been submitted. Is there anything that we can utilize? And then just make sure that when we meet with the presenters, because we would schedule meetings with each presenter prior to the conference to go over their session, to do like a quick tech dry run to make sure they're comfortable with Zoom, because we don't want to assume that everybody's comfortable with online, you know, virtual seminars or virtual sessions. But how do we make sure that, you know, the latest information is being provided to them, that they're aware of like what the topics are and what's happening in relation to the pandemic to their topic. So that was part of our job, was making sure that we're meeting with them and discussing that. So I think that was a big thing. I think in terms of when you even take it back a step further, you know, who is making the decision at your organization? Who's reviewing the content? Making sure that folks that are reviewing it, that you have a broad perspective, that it isn't, you know, one person making the decision. Making sure that there's multiple eyes that are on it, that are able to give that feedback and that perspective, because you want to make sure that you're being inclusive, and you want to make sure that you're getting different voices around the table and it isn't just one voice. So I think that was really something that was important. We had a group that was assembled to work on the conference, but then we also reached out to other staff members and said, hey, you know, I want you to take a look at this. Do you have any feedback? Do you have any perspective on this? Any ideas? Just to make sure that everybody was engaged. And also gave us that wide perspective that I think is really important. And then in terms of the feedback from the previous year, you know, I looked at it and then tried to match it up to some of the content that was coming in and say, okay, last year we heard this from folks. They said they wanted to see more of this. Is what we're getting reflective of that? If it isn't, we may need to follow up and find these types of speakers or these types of topics. So how do we do that? So that was also coming back to the information that was provided previously and making sure that, you know, we were taking that into consideration as well. And I would also say, you know, the feedback that we received from the conference, you know, even though it was specifically for the conference, it can also speak to things that you do year round. It may not be a conference. It may be that you do seminars. It may be that you decide to do a webinar. Maybe you do special events. Using that feedback, I think, is helpful for other things, not just for like maybe the conference per se that you're working on, but it can speak to other activities that your organization is putting forth. And, you know, maybe it's a special event. Maybe you're noticing that, you know, the feedback you're getting is on one specific topic. So maybe you design a webinar specific to that topic. Similarly to the virtual lunch and learns, like we get feedback saying we want to learn about this, we want to talk about this, then we make sure that we can offer that. So I think it's really important to not just think about feedback in the context of like one activity or one event, but how does that play out to what you offer as an organization year round? So there's that. Now, when you talk about nuts and bolts, which is the fun part of everything, just lots of lessons learned. I mean, we had a situation where we, on the day of 15 minutes before going on, somebody wasn't available. So we then had to figure out, okay, this person's not available. Let's come back, let's figure it out. And luckily we had content that we were able to replace and have somebody come in and replace that. But, you know, one of the things that we worked on and Aaron worked on was having a complete backup system in case Zoom shut down. So it's also the same thing for content, making sure that you have some backup plans available, backup content, should somebody, you know, not be able to join. Things happen, life happens, you know, folks aren't available all the time, and sometimes you don't find out until the last minute. And you want to make sure that you don't have just, you know, just space and nothing happening and folks are kind of just waiting. So that's something that we had to deal with. I think one of the things that I worked on was just making sure that I over communicated. And one of the things that I got to, just things to think about is, you know, when you're reaching out to a lot of folks, there's so much email coming in, and sometimes your email is going to spam. So you're thinking that you're communicating, you're on it, you're contacting everybody knows what's going on. And then you find out, oh, by the way, I never received that. So I think one of the things that we worked on was making sure that we had email addresses for everybody and cell phone numbers for everybody, so we could reach out via text. We could confirm that they received the information. We also looked at if anybody was working with an assistant, we made sure that the assistant was included on all communication, Outlook invites, documentation, follow-up, anything related to that person's speaking engagement, the assistant was also included on. And then what we also did was we created one document that had pretty much everything. Think of it as like a speaker's kind of toolkit. And it basically listed everything. The Zoom link, you know, making sure they had the most up-to-date Zoom link, lighting instructions, because we were recording everything. So we wanted to make sure that folks had that, they were considering that as well. The topic, you know, the summary of the topic, some talking points, background information, the other speakers, if it was a panel that were going to be there, everything in one document that they could access prior to and the day of, so they weren't scrambling for, oh my God, let me find my email because I need to find this, or I don't remember who's talking, I don't remember the questions, just to try to really make it a little less stressful for folks, because again, this is a stressful time in general, but even now it's heightened. So we want to make sure that we're making it as you know, as seamless and easy as possible. So those are some of like the nuts and bolts things, and then also scheduling calls with folks before the conference. So if folks came on and said, yes, we agree, we're going to be able to be available for it, we'd schedule a time to meet with them. So if we had panels, we schedule a meeting, a Zoom meeting with all of the panelists together to be able to talk through everything. So that way, the first time they met wasn't the day of the conference. They were able to meet each other, were able to talk to each other, run things by each other, ask questions. And I feel like that was something that was super helpful for them, just to get to know each other and just to talk it through a little bit, because you don't ever want it to be that kind of cold call of just like, oh, we're meeting for the first time and it's the actual conference. So we did that as well. I think one of the other things too is in terms of like post-event, and something that I think, you know, we're still working on is like ways in which you stay connected. I think when you're working on something, whether it's a conference or a seminar, and you know, a lot of times it's some last minute things. There's last minute needs that come in. Maybe you need to you know, ask for a favor. Hey, this person wasn't available. Can you step in? We also want to make sure that we're maintaining that connection. We don't want it to be necessarily a transactional relationship, but how do you make sure that it's a relationship that extends beyond the conference or beyond the seminar? So, you know, following up with a thank you. I know we were going to do handwritten thank yous that were going to be sent out to any and everybody that participated, making sure that information on the sessions, because a lot of the speakers want to share the session because we recorded it with their constituents, with their followers. So how do we make sure that we get them the materials that they need to be able to share and to be able to continue to share what we do as CNM, but what they do as well, in an effective manner and in a timely manner. So those things. But then I think too, it's just, how do you build your network? So how do you think about, you know, the next time something comes up, you have folks that you're that are in your network that you can go to, your go-to folks, and you're extending that and expanding that circle. Because I think a lot of times, you know, we have our circles, right? We have the folks that we can depend on, that we go to. And, you know, sometimes we maybe aren't as open to expanding that circle a little bit. And sometimes those folks may not be available. So how do you make sure that you're really reaching out to folks and you're thanking them, but you're also looking at ways that you can work with them beyond the conference? Whether that's connecting with them afterwards, whether it's keeping track, keep following up with them on what they're doing. You know, what is it, promoting some of their activities? Is it making sure that if there's an upcoming opportunity for a seminar, that we're making sure to reach out to them as well? There's just different ways, and I think it's important that we have to reciprocate, that we want to make sure that if we're building these connections and we're trying to stay connected, we want to make sure that we're doing that on our end as well, that it's not just a, hey, thanks for showing up, thanks for being at the conference, and then you won't hear from me for a year. That's not, you know, that's not good. So whether it's using LinkedIn to stay connected with folks, I mean, for me personally, I'm following up with everybody, thanking them, and then also doing like a quick LinkedIn as well, just to connect with them and let them know what's going on, and see if there's any other activities that you know, we can support as well. So those are just, excuse me, some of the ideas that we had, or that we're working on at CNM for this. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you, Alicia. And I can't believe I forgot to talk about backup plans. That was like such a crucial part of the process.
Huge part, huge part.
Yeah, layers and layers of backup plans. Like the biggest one, and that was the first piece of advice we got on doing a virtual event, is backup tech. What happens if you wake up and you're about to start your event and there's some giant Zoom outage and everything's on Zoom? So we had heard that from a number of different people and had seen some peers who had, you know, invested in some of these bigger tech platforms, and the morning of, it just didn't work. And so you need to have a backup ready to go. We had GoToMeeting and GoToWebinar was our backup, and we had, you know, 3 GoToMeeting accounts that mirrored our Zoom accounts. And so in our master planning document, where we had all of the Zoom links listed out for each session, we just had another column next to that that had the backup link, so that in a pinch, if it suddenly stopped working or if there was clearly some sort of outage, we had a backup meeting that was already scheduled on another platform ready to go. And all we needed to do was say like, okay, activate backup plan, which was, you know, everyone who was hosting the meeting was involved in, and would just involve, you know, updating the link that attendees would get, letting the support staff know that it had changed. Thankfully, we didn't need to use that backup platform, but we did use some of our more, you know, redundant approaches of, even if speakers were going to be sharing their own slides, we needed to make sure that we had a link to all slide presentations just to be safe. And that happened a couple of times where some speaker was about to start presenting and they couldn't get their screen sharing working, or they couldn't find the file or something like that. And so having as much redundancy both on the content side and on the tech side as possible, just, you can't go wrong. And Alicia, I think you sold yourself short a little bit, because we didn't just, you talked about the RFP process, that had been sort of pre-COVID, and we needed to go through and screen those and kind of figure out what would and wouldn't work, you know, in a COVID world. But then that happened pretty much again the week before the conference, when all of the Black Lives Matter protests broke out, and we needed to, you know, pivot again kind of quickly. And so we were talking about this right after we wrapped the conference, that, you know, events can be way over planned where everything down to the last minute is documented, and way under planned where it's just a little bit too open and improv. And you got to kind of find the right balance there, because if it's too over planned, then you need to make a change, and it's really hard to change. And so I think, you know, we pretty much reformatted the 3rd day of our conference and didn't have it finalized until maybe the hour before it started, I think. We got, you know, a handful of new speakers in the day before, and we were going to have pre-recorded messages coming in, and we got the last one maybe 30 minutes before the session started. So, you know, it can be a little chaotic behind the scenes. You want to present a very clean and non-chaotic view to participants, but finding that right balance between over and under planning and structuring, and making sure that there's some room for improvisation, because it's going to be necessary.
And I forgot to mention that 2 things. One, like another thing before starting, like I just went online and just looked for, you know, different folks' perspective of lessons that they learned from doing a virtual conference. or seminar or activity, and I'll share those links here. Those are just like, hey, I just want to look and see like what are other folks learning. I think too what Erin was mentioning, like pivoting again, so it was like a second pivot. We wanted to make sure that, you know, you don't want to come off tone deaf. You want to make sure that you recognize this is a situation that is, it's always been an issue in this country. So it isn't just a momentary thing, but now, as what's happening with the uprisings that were happening and that are continue to happen, we want to make sure that we're being responsive as well and acknowledging that. So we did have the way that it worked was we had an open, and I remember when this first was presented, I was just like, oh no. It was okay. We're just gonna leave it the final session. It'll just be folks. It'll be open, and tell us what you want to see. Just tell us what you want to see, and then we'll plan. We'll plan around that. So literally, like the day before, at like I think it was like 5:30, we were going through everything, and then following up with folks that we were going to bring in, confirming them, making sure that we had a quick time to meet with them and go over the topics and go over the information. So it was good to do that, I think, because it did offer the opportunity to be very responsive the moment of, and it worked out. But it's just like things to consider, like if you're offering those types of options where it's like, hey, you choose your session, you tell us what you want, just to know that that's going to create some additional stress. But I think it worked out, and it also gave us an opportunity to hear from conference participants as they were going through the conference, as things were happening, like what they were seeing, what they wanted to talk about, because you do your best to try to be as responsive as possible, but things change, people's feelings change, and needs change. So it was good to be able to have that perspective. The last thing I was going to say, and I think is something that's really important, is what we did too is all the chats, everything, all the information that was shared in chats, we were sharing information, participants were sharing information, links, reports, studies, all these different resources. We went through all the chats and compiled all the resources based on each day. So that way, when we send the information out to the participants, they have that. Because, as you're in the conference or in a webinar, you're maybe not necessarily copying and pasting everything as it's going. You may not have the time to do that. So I think that was an added thing to make sure that, all the resources and topics that were discussed during the conference for that specific session or keynote or panel is then available to participants post-conference, and being able to click on those links and have all that information, I think is really helpful.
Absolutely. And to your point about kind of the flexibility of that last session, like it's again, one of the perks of doing a virtual event. If that had been in person, programs would have been printed, signage would have been printed. It would have been a lot harder at the last minute to switch everything over. But because it's all virtual, you can change anything up to the minute of the session pretty much. Thanks for popping those links in there. Love to answer questions. Please add them into the chat, unmute yourself, and just ask away if you've got any. I saw Candace's question about asking for some boilerplate on the kind of speaker instructions. And Alicia, curious if you've got any of that you can share, or if we can either copy and paste or follow up with a link afterwards. I also wanted to share a link to our video on demand now. So we wanted to make all of the videos available to all of the attendees, but also try charging for them, small prices to people that didn't show up. We put all this work into making a conference and only so many people can join. So we ended up landing on Vimeo, which seemed pretty straightforward and easy. Did a bunch of research, and there's a lot of video on demand platforms out there right now. And most of them had way more features than we needed. Most of them were versions of how to create your own Netflix, pretty much. And they seemed geared towards fitness apps and people that are going to be regularly churning out a lot of content, and a lot of different monetization options, from ad supported to subscriptions to transactions. And we really just wanted to try something simple of, $4.99 to, just stream or download a session. And so we put up all the videos, we cleaned them up a little bit. And then, as Alicia was saying, shared the links to the presenter resources, compiled all of the resources in the chat that were shared, and really just have, one place where people that didn't attend all of the conference could then go and, catch up and just make that as easy an experience as possible. But would love to answer more questions if anybody's got them, or just to learn more about Shanti's event because it sounded really cool.
Well, if nobody has anything to add on, when you were going through the nuts and bolts and making sure that you have backup, one of the things we did experience was a situation where we had to quickly shift, because our plan was to broadcast from our offices, which is located in Little Tokyo, which is center of downtown LA. And the event was May 31st, which was the day of the protest, and everything just went awry. And of course, we ended up on curfew. So to ensure the safety of everybody involved, and obviously we couldn't be outdoors after 6 p.m., I think it was that day, we had to shift and have everybody work from home. And so that delayed the event, because it was supposed to start at 5:30. We ended up not starting until 6:30. And we had to make some immediate, we had to definitely find ways to, one, be able to get our audience to not leave us and to stay engaged, and to have people kind of just hop in and to be able to help. And so we ended up going live from our director's home, and he just talked about obviously what was going on, which everybody was very understanding about what was going on, and understood what we were going through. And then had another individual come on, and they had some fun, witty banter to kind of entertain people until we can get set up. And so that was interesting. One thing
Talk about last minute improvisations.
Exactly. But it worked out. And the streaming was a little slower, obviously, because it came from somebody's home versus being in with the office internet. But it definitely worked out for the best.
Yeah, the streaming quality was something we noticed a couple of times, because there's it's not just a single source. There's so many different connections. So I think one of our panelists on one of the panels had really slow internet. And so like the audio is coming through fine, but the video is really choppy. And as soon as anything pauses or goes a little wrong, there's that instant like, oh my God, is it me? Is it them? Is it everyone? Like, I can't really tell or be sure instantly. So it became pretty clear that it was just this one speaker. But it's that, that panic of, oh my God, everything was built perfectly and now it's not working for reasons completely out of our control. And,
right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Good question here from Mike about audio clarity and speaker with an accent. So I think there's kind of two ways of approaching this. One was what Alicia had posted in the chat above here, that Zoom has support for language interpretation now. And it looks like that's pretty much a way of designating, certain attendees as, an interpreter. And so that other attendees could then choose to listen to their audio over the audio of the person who's speaking. I think the other side of it, though, is a little bit on the technology side. We've really stayed and were able to just use laptops and what we had. But I've seen people that are upgrading to nicer cameras, to nicer microphones. My dad's a therapist, and he switched over to doing, remote therapy pretty quick. And he had to upgrade, he got a new microphone pretty quickly. He got a new camera. He got himself a much more comfortable chair, and he like made a little mock-up in his room to make it look kind of officey. But I know that, if you're concerned about audio quality, if you're concerned about somebody who, might not be understood by everyone, there are definitely some tech upgrades to consider. The only place where I think we ran into some tech limitations is that we wanted to have as many of our speakers as possible using, virtual backdrops, both to, for privacy reasons and also for sponsorship promotion. That was one place that we thought like, this is a place where we can plug a sponsor and give them some airtime, was, adding their logo to the little backdrop behind them. But a lot of the computers that either we were using or that sponsors were using didn't have, the new enough camera to be able to use the virtual backdrop. And so they tried, and it was that whole, like, their face is all mushy and weird, and not actually using virtual. But that'd be one thing I'd say is just, if you're going to be doing a lot of virtual events, you might want to invest in some, better hardware in particular, because I've seen that like a better microphone, a better camera, like can really make a big difference, especially if it's going over limited bandwidth and everything's getting crunched down and compressed, more than normal already. Any other final questions? Don't want to take too much of everyone's time. I hope this has been helpful, but want to make sure that everybody's got an opportunity to, ask a question if you've got a burning one about an upcoming virtual event or anything learned from a virtual event that you've done recently.
And I can share I'll share the template, like the document that we use, and you would just fill in your information, but it has, like basically this is your plan, like follow along, and you'll get through, you'll get through your day or your session, your panel. So let me get that real quick.
Yeah, because I think that to your point, Alicia, there was some things are a lot easier and some things are a lot harder about doing this virtually. And I was reflecting, I was really glad it wasn't my job to make sure everybody showed up on time, because in a virtual or an in-person event, the people show up and they check in and they're there and you don't need to worry anymore. But for virtual, for every session we had, it was making sure, is this person there? Are they accessible? Did they respond? And pretty much everybody showed up when they needed to show up, except for, one person who had to kind of bail pretty last minute and we needed to pivot. But again, there, some things are a lot easier digitally and some things are a lot harder. And just kind of leaning into what makes them better and trying to figure out ways of coping with the additional challenges of doing things virtually. I'll leave it open for another minute if anyone has any additional questions. And as Alicia pulls this template to share.
Yeah, this is Leanne. I have a question to see if anyone can share. We are looking to have a virtual gala, again, and moving our physical location gala to virtual in late August. And we think it'll still have to be virtual just because of some people not even feeling comfortable, going to a place, even if we can all be together at that point. And our original event was to be on a Saturday night. So currently we're still planning a Saturday night and then making the program shorter. Some of our folks are saying they're not sure that people will want to participate in a virtual event on a Saturday night versus maybe switching it to a Thursday night. So want to see if anybody has some experience with that.
It's a great question. And one of the things that we ran into is that when you're trying to plan events like this, you always look for other best practices. And when we started doing this, everyone was saying, like, it's the Wild West. There are no best practices. Everything that was a best practice was completely thrown out the window. And there is no conventional wisdom. We're like, okay, great. That's not super helpful. But that's a good question about the event day. I've been finding, especially for evening events, that like nobody's going anywhere or doing anything. And so it would have been a lot more challenging to do a Thursday evening event before, I would think, because that, in the long ago, the before time was, when everyone would do their, Thursday evening kind of mixers and happy hour events and stuff. And so there'd be a lot more competition. And that people would want to use Saturday to kind of relax and unwind from being at work so much. But I just don't know if any of those things are true anymore. There's a lot less competition for after work events that, people would have been leaving and going to something physical. And people are just a lot less busy on the weekend. I would recommend, and curious what other people think, but I would recommend doing a little poll if you can. That was the other thing we were told, is that, survey your audience as much as you can. And it was hard to do because we were trying to move so fast and had so little time. But when time permits and when you've got the ability to, just ask your audience, give them some options and see what, the general consensus is. And if they're, you have an idea and then the poll turns out to show something completely opposite, better to act on data when you can and when you're able to get it. And we just struggled with, timelines of being able to get data. But I'd be curious if anybody else has opinions on Thursday versus Saturday events, both, from your own experience as an attendee or as a planner.
For us, we had better results actually on a Monday night. So I agree with, to your point, Aaron, to survey your audience. Our audience tends to fall in the 50+ range. So for them, early on a Monday night was actually better, where they were able to, those who still worked were able to have something to do after work. Those who didn't liked it being earlier so that it wasn't, necessarily interrupting their activities on the weekends. So, and it also, when we were live, it was more beneficial for us as far as fees with venues and other things. So it saved us some money to do it on the Monday night. So definitely with our virtual event, we chose to do a Sunday night this time. But again, everybody was kind of on lockdown, so it's a little different. I think with people, the mix of people that are going to want to be out and about and those who aren't comfortable yet, Saturday may be tricky. So I would probably opt for a Thursday or midweek of some sort.
Yeah. And there's such the challenge of predicting too. You know, when we were planning our event in like March, we were guessing of like what was going to be happening in June and thinking like, we're probably still fine. But I remember there was a real fear of like, what if a lot of people are back to their offices by then and they're working in their offices and therefore unable to join our virtual event during the day? And so I'm sure, you know, Leanne, you're going through similar things right now of like, what's the world going to look like in August? And there's, you know, maybe things are going to be opened up and a lot of people are going to be going to Saturday events. So there's that, you know, how do you pull your audience and make the best decision? But there's also just so much uncertainty to, you know, deal with right now that's definitely an added concern, I'm sure.
This is helpful. Thank you.
Glad to hear it. Any other final questions before we wrap this up? We're just about at the end of our hour. Happy to go over if anyone wants to keep chatting, but definitely don't want to take advantage of your time too much. Really appreciate everyone joining today.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Appreciate like hearing from folks and their experiences as well. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Alicia, did you have a document you were going to share?
Yes, I shared it in the chat.
Oh, great. I see it. Thank you.
Very cool. Well, thank you all so much for taking the time. I hope everybody has a good and a healthy and a safe weekend. And hope to see you at our next Lunch and Learn.
All right. Have a good one, everybody. Have a good weekend.